Hello everyone, this is Mustafa Marayati and this is the third part of our series regarding the arterial supply of the brain. In this third part, we are going to discuss the middle cerebral artery. So regarding the middle cerebral artery, for the general anatomic orientation, as it goes off the internal carotid artery, the ICA, and the two terminal branches of the ICA, we should know them, the lateral one, which is the MCA, and the medial one, the ACA. So as we can see here, the MCA, as it goes off the ICA, the terminal ICA or the C4 segment of the ICA, it will go laterally. So regarding the MCA segments, it has four segments. And as we can see here, here is our right hemisphere, and this is the right ICA, colored in the red. Indeed, the first part of the MCA lies anterior to a bony ridge that's called the sphenoidal ridge. It's a bony ridge that lies posterior to the first segment or to the sphenoidal segment, which is also termed as the M1 segment of the MCA, as we can see here in the blue segment. Indeed, at the end of the M1 segment, there would be a bifurcation for the MCA into a superior and inferior trunk. And now the second segment of the MCA comes, which will be termed as the insular segment or the M2 segment, as it passes on the surface of the insula. Here we have, this is the frontoparietal lobe, and this is the temporal lobe, and this is the sylvian fissure between them, so this should be the insula, the fifth lobe of the brain. Indeed, we will see it in other pictures, but just for the orientation for this figure, we are viewing here the M2 segment passing on the surface of the insula. So this would be the M2 segment or the insular segment. And then we have the third segment, the opercular segment or the M3 segment of the MCA, as it would pass on the operculum of the brain. So the operculum are the lips, just like the lips. There would be a frontoparietal operculum, and there would be a temporal operculum. This surface of the brain here is termed as the operculum. So the segment of the MCA that passes horizontally to get out on the lateral surface of the brain is termed as the opercular segment or the M3 segment. And here finally we have the cortical segment, the M4 segment, that would supply the cortex on the lateral surface of the hemisphere. Here is a drawing for the course of the MCA. Here's the ICA. This is the supracranial segment of the ICA, and here is the M1 segment. This is the sphenoidal segment of the MCA, and here is the bifurcation into superior trunk and inferior trunk. So the bifurcation are part of the M1 segment of the MCA. And then we have the M2 segment, the insular segment, as it passes on the surface of the insula. We termed it the M2 segment, and then the M3 segment as it passes on the insula, so the operculum, the opercular segment, and then we have the cortical segment, the C4 segment, the M4 segment of the MCA. Here is a coronal section. Here is the right hemisphere. This is the left hemisphere, showing the left ICA, and this is the MCA passes, and this is the M1 segment, the sphenoidal segment, and bifurcates into superior and inferior division, or superior and inferior trunks. Usually the superior trunk supply the upper half of the lateral surface of the hemisphere, and the inferior trunk usually supplies the lower half on the lateral surface of the hemisphere. This is as showing the brain from above, and here is this is the right hemisphere, and this is the left hemisphere. The superior part of the left hemisphere has been removed to show the course of the MCA. This is the ICA, giving rise to the terminal branch. The biggest one is the MCA. This is the M1 segment, and this is the terminal bifurcation over here. And then we have the insular segment, the M2 segment. So as the artery changes its direction, it becomes another segment. For example, as we can see here, this is the dark blue, the M1 segment goes horizontally, then it becomes vertical. This is the insular segment. One more time, it becomes horizontal. This is the opercular segment, and then it becomes horizontal one more time. That would be the cortical segment. Here is another coronal section. This is the right ICA, giving rise to the right MCA over here. And as we can see here, this is the M1, the sphenoidal segment, and here should be the insula. Here is the insular lobe, and this is the M2 segment, the insular segment. And then we have the opercular segment over here. This is the frontoparietal opercula above and the temporal opercula below. And then we have the cortical segment, the M4 segment of the MCA. The areas to be supplied by the MCA are divided into 12 defined areas, 6 above in the upper part of the lateral hemisphere and 6 below on the lateral surface of the hemisphere. Indeed, as the MCA divided into a superior and inferior trunk, there would be an arteries originating from these trunks would be termed as stem arteries. Each stem artery is designed to go to a specific area from these 12 areas to supply it. For example, we have here the orbitofrontal area, the prefrontal, the precentral, the central, anterior parietal, posterior parietal areas that would be supplied by the superior trunk usually, and there would be stem arteries designated for each area. And then inferiorly, we have the angular area, the temporo-occipital, the posterior temporal, middle temporal, anterior temporal, and the temporopolar area. Usually, there is an early branch of the MCA that originates from the M1, the sphenoidal segment of the MCA, that usually goes to the temporopolar area that would supply the anterior half of the temporal lobe. And that concludes the third part of this series regarding the middle cerebral artery.